The internet is fighting about Emerald Fennell's take on Wuthering Heights, which is of course only boosting the film's notoriety. Is a movie adaptation even a worthwhile watch if it is not loyal to the original text? Did Fennell have a moral or political obligation to cast a black or brown actor as Heathcliff? We'll get to all of that. But first, I have one overarching question. Why so many Gothic movies and why now? Greetings from the simulacrum. My name is MJ Corey, and today we're going to talk about the relationship between the Gothic genre and the postmodern condition through the lens of Wuthering Heights. Very Gothic. Love to see it. It's safe to say that we're in the middle of a Gothic revival, which is interesting because it comes at a time when culture has never been more postmodern. If the Gothic conjures associations with stormy weather and passionate emotions and old architecture, then the postmodern condition that we know we live within is associated with algorithms and self-reflexivity and social anxiety. This alone might tell us all we need to know. We crave the passion of the Gothic genre exactly because we're trapped in a fragmented, alienating time that disconnects us from one another and from nature. But there's even more to unpack, because if history tells us anything, it's that Gothic revivals happen during periods of massive upheaval. Buckle up, because as we learn more about the history of the Gothic genre, I'm also about to talk shit about Nosferatu and defend Luc Besson's version of Dracula. And there will also be a big reveal about why I'm at this specific cemetery in Paris to talk to you about these ideas. 3 down, 7 in. Why is this so hard? 5, 6, 7. Is that it? Is that it? Before we even trace the history of the Gothic genre, let's first define the terms. Like postmodernism, the Gothic is hard to pin down, but the writer Sarah Perry does it well in this Paris Review piece. She starts with the term's origins, an insult. She writes, Giorgio Vasari, an Italian scholar with a taste for the white facades and polite proportions of classical architecture, found himself within a vaulted cathedral and was appalled. It was, he said, all confusion and disorder, a deformed malediction that polluted the world. It was, in fact, Gothic. So the idea here is that the Gothic is inherently subversive, an affront to easy on the eyes symmetry and coherent simplicity. Before, classical and Renaissance architecture emphasized proportion and light, representative of rationality, and then came the Gothic. When Gothic literature emerged in the late 18th century, it carried these architectural principles into narrative. Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto, generally considered the first Gothic novel, literally begins with a building, a medieval castle filled with secrets. What Vasari found offensive in Gothic cathedrals, the aforementioned confusion and disorder, became Gothic literature's defining features. Writers like Anne Radcliffe, Matthew Lewis, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, the Bronte sisters, and Bram Stoker went on to create a tradition that centered emotion over reason and the supernatural over the empirical. Note that this is a genre that actually included more women than many other literary and artistic movements in history. It's in the 8th division, down 3 and over 8. No, over 7 or over down 7 and 3 in. I think it's down 7, down 3 and 7 in. It was the literary theorist David Punter who argued in The Literature of Terror that Gothic literature resurges during periods of social crisis and cultural anxiety. Punter sees the Gothic as a way of processing fears about social breakdown and transformation. This pattern does hold true across history. The original Gothic literature emerged during some massive transformations between the 18th and 19th centuries, when the French Revolution shattered old structures and the Industrial Revolution made everything move faster, and the widespread crisis of religious faith brought on by the scientific discoveries during the Enlightenment. For example, when the Reign of Terror was happening in France, Anne Radcliffe published The Mysteries of Udolpho and Matthew Lewis published The Monk. This was a period when English aristocrats were terrified that the revolution might cross the channel and come for them next. Gothic novels about ancient castles with terrible secrets in their basements and innocent young women being threatened by powerful, corrupt men could be seen as outlets. Then, in 1818, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein emerged from the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars during crop failures and economic depression in what was called the Year Without a Summer, due to volcanic ash blocking the sunlight. Britain was also adapting to industrialization, which had uprooted the economy, turned cities grimy, and displaced many laborers, even leading to a Luddite movement where textile workers started smashing the machines they were expected to use. So these ideas that the monster cobbled together from corpses, or that science can overreach, or that a creator could be cruel enough to abandon his creation, all of these themes spoke to the culture at that time. Then came the very recognizable Victorian Gothic with the Brontes' Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre in the mid-century. These classics coincided with the apex of Victorian preoccupation with class mobility, women's independence, the expansion of the cities, and the fear that crime and poverty could come for the middle class. Gothic novels about mad women and addicts and innocent women being threatened by their employers, and all in all, respectable people with hidden pasts. These articulated middle-class fears about social contamination and the fragility of respectability. The later Victorian period gave us Dracula and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and the picture of Dorian Gray, all emerging during intense culture shifts to do with British imperial decline, the emergence of the New Woman and early feminist movements, fears about racial integration and immigration brought about by the scramble for Africa, and pseudoscientific ideas about race and eugenics. Unsettling stories about vampires from Eastern Europe invading London and coming for pure women, and respectable men with hidden monstrous selves and eternal youth purchased through moral corruption. Again, the Gothic was giving form to an overwhelming sense of dread and confusion. We're almost done because you get the gist. Then the early 20th century brought German expressionist Gothic cinema, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, Metropolis. These emerged from post-World War I trauma. The distorted sets, the exaggerated shadows, the mad or monstrous authority figures expressed German anxiety about the collapse of the old order and the rise of fascism. And then America had its own Gothic revival in the 50s and 60s through horror comics and B-movies and writers like Shirley Jackson and Richard Matheson. The scholar Bernice M. Murphy has called these suburban Gothics, about nuclear threats, the conformity of suburban life, the idea of the monster next door who looks just like everyone else. And now we're in another Gothic revival and Punter's pattern persists. We're living through what many have called the polycrisis, multiple overlapping crises that feed into each other. A post-pandemic society that was never the same after 2020 tracks with Dracula, which can be interpreted to be about contagion. A vampire bites you and suddenly you're infected and transforming. Political polarization approaching levels of civil conflict. Well, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde certainly fits, with two opposite personalities jammed into one man. Climate change creating a constant sense of doom. Well, Jane Eyre was written during the rise of climate science, with Bronte using weather as a metaphor for emotional moods. It makes sense that we might be drawn to stories that use weather to reflect emotions. And finally, artificial intelligence, threatening employment and shifting our experiences of reality itself. We'll discuss a little later how we can find aspects of that theme in Frankenstein. I'd also add that today's emphasis on identity politics is a big part of the rise of the Gothic. In history and today, the notion of a monster outsider becomes a way to explore society's othering of groups of people. The first season of True Blood did this well with vampires as a metaphor for queer people, and Sinners is doing it too now with vampires and race in the American South. So when people notice in Bronte's book that Heathcliff may have been written to be black or brown, and then fight online about how a white man was yet again cast for the role, people are not just fighting about representation in a period drama. Larger feelings are being told about racial justice and who gets to tell which stories.
Well, I think the thing is that it's my favorite book in the world. Everyone who loves this book has such a personal connection to it. And so you can only ever kind of make the movie that you sort of imagined yourself when you read it.
But the difference between the Gothic literature of the past and the movie adaptations being made in the postmodern era is that the conversations are happening on an algorithm. During my research for my Kardashian book, I learned early on that racial controversy is basically a big red go viral button. And I'll say what I say often. Every American or Western icon has some sort of anxiety about race attached to them. Go ahead, take inventory. Michael Jackson, Madonna, Kim K, even Mickey Mouse. So I couldn't help but wonder, could the anticipation of outcry be part of the movie's marketing plan? The discourse is massively boosting the film. People are laughing that it only broke even in its first week. But today, that's a win. Love or hate it, Wuthering Heights was a success. I suspect Emerald Fennell, who already featured Jacob Elordi in her second film, Saltburn, just wants to make him her directorial muse, like Sophia did with Kirsten Dunst's Story Yorgos with Emma Stone. Let's just note that his feminist Frankenstein-esque Poor Things kind of ushered in this neo-Gothic era the film industry is now in. From what I can tell, Fennell's Wuthering Heights was a disloyal adaptation of the novel in numerous ways. She seemed to opt for the most swoony, girlish interpretations, evident in the branding alone. Suggestions that Margot and Jacob caught a vibe during filming, aesthetically old-school movie posters, a soundtrack collaboration with Charlie XCX. Which brings us to a core question. What is Fennell really doing when she makes these self-conscious, hyper-aestheticized versions of a dark love story? One answer can be found from a media theorist from the 70s who understood something important about how artists make use of cliché. Oh shoot, that's not good. Do we just step on graves? I'm sorry, Carmen. In his book From Cliché to Archetype, Marshall McLuhan observed that as culture moves forward technologically and socially, they simultaneously reach backwards, using clichés and archetypes from the past and recontextualizing them for contemporary audiences. He called this retrogressive retrieval. He wrote that the cliché is incompatible with other clichés, but the archetype is retrieved from the cliché by a new vision. In other words, when we modernize old forms, we're engaging in a kind of cultural alchemy that transforms the familiar into something more visible due to the contrast. McLuhan gave the example of James Joyce and T.S. Eliot, who wrote little epics that reached back to, or retrieved, ancient forms like Homer's Odyssey, but reappropriated them through modernist sensibilities. So Joyce's Ulysses takes the epic journey and transposes it into a single day in Dublin. The heroic becomes mundane. The result is both familiar and surprising. This is retrieval, taking what was once fresh, Homer, acknowledging that it's become cliché, countless subsequent epics, and making it archetypal through recontextualization. So Fennell seems to be trying to retrieve the genre by using a caricature of its most classic conventions, branding that refers to Gothic book covers from the pulpy 60s and 70s, featuring intense lovemaking and wild weather and so on. But McLuhan also emphasized that retrieval is not nostalgia. Nostalgia wants to return to the past. Retrieval wants to make the past useful for understanding the present through contrast. In my opinion, the best Gothic adaptations today are the ones that show how we're not trying to escape to the 19th century, but we're using the 19th century's emotional vocabulary to articulate something about the present that we can't say in any other way. That's why, despite all the flack it's been catching, I think Luc Besson's Dracula did very well, but we'll get to that later. But my point is, by this logic, Fennell didn't need to adapt Wuthering Heights. She seemed to want to retrieve from any great Gothic piece and recontextualize according to her own lush vision, keeping Elordi as her main muse. She could have left Wuthering Heights alone and done this with The Story of Rebecca, published in 1938 by Daphne du Maurier, which was retrieved from Bronte's 1847 Jane Eyre, a story about an every woman who pines for a brooding man who's got a crazy ex. This would have actually put even more emphasis on Elordi's performance and left another auteur to take on Wuthering Heights in a way that the public could accept. But then again, without controversy, it might not have been so viral. Which brings us to our addiction to algorithms, which we can consider a postmodern phenomenon. When I'm dead, scatter my ashes here. I'm afraid to how do we get out of these graves? So what is postmodernism? Well, it's as tricky to define as the Gothic. The French theorist Jean Baudrillard, my go-to guy in my work, whose resting place in Paris I am currently visiting right now, described it as the collapse of distinctions between high and low culture, between reality and simulation, where boundaries dissolve into a chaotic proliferation of signs and images that no longer refer to any underlying reality. Baudrillard argued that we've entered a state of hyperreality, where copies and simulations have replaced what is real, and where the copy can be more relevant than its origin. For example, reality TV isn't real, but people perform reality TV behavior in their actual lives, making their lives imitate an already fake imitation of life. Or social media. We share curated simulations of idealized lives or perfected personas that convey authenticity, but then due to the networked connectivity of the feeds, people base their own personas on the people whose content they consume. Or they visit tourist destinations to take the same photo everyone else has taken. They write papers and articles using AI without having done the actual reading. So with the Gothic and the postmodern, we have two forms of chaos and subversion with different characteristics. The Gothic, heavy, vaulted, melodramatic architecture, sad girls weeping on stormy cliffsides about sexy ghosts. The postmodern, algorithmic chaos, doom scrolling, deepfakes, identity as performance. But here's what connects the two. Something eerie runs through both, something uncanny. I've written a lot in the past about how the Kardashian aesthetic evokes a sort of uncanny valley, that feeling of discomfort when something looks almost but not quite human. And the uncanny is a key feeling in the Gothic. Sarah Perry, in that Paris Review piece, cites Freud's essay, The Uncanny, where he describes it as that class of the frightening which leads back to what is known of old and long familiar. There's one moment in Nosferatu, which by the way I did not feel was a strong adaptation, which is obviously supposed to evoke an uncanny feeling. It's when Lily Rose Depp's character is possessed by a dark erotic force and her face transforms. Fans love that she did this without CGI, but I think it was a rare case where a little CGI was needed to make things feel properly off. Gothic literature utilizes the uncanny constantly. Think of the governess in The Turn of the Screw, unable to tell if she's seeing ghosts or losing her mind. Or Mr. Hyde, who is both Jekyll and not Jekyll at the same time. Or Lucy in Dracula, who becomes a predator wearing the face of a victim. The Gothic shows us people in places that we think we know and then reveals them as not that. This is why the Gothic and the postmodern are actually companions. They're both responses to the collapse of certainty and articulate the feeling that the familiar world has been replaced by something alien wearing the world's face. And that's where the Gothic and the postmodern really fuse. The body as construction site. Frankenstein, written by Mary Shelley and published in the early 19th century, gave us the image of a body cobbled together from disparate parts, animated by electricity, brought to life. The creature is the ultimate uncanny being, human-ish, familiar features arranged in unfamiliar ways, close enough to us to trigger recognition, but different enough to trigger fear. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the recent Frankenstein adaptation for Netflix was just too polished and Netflixy to properly capture all the shame and tragedy true to the story. The 2025 timing of its release makes sense though. With plastic surgery culture and even social media culture, we've all become Dr. Frankenstein, assembling our bodies and self-concepts from parts scavenged from culture around us. The Kardashians are the most extreme example of this. Their bodies have been surgically constructed, continuously modified, filtered and edited in photos, performed in carefully staged paparazzi shots, commodified and turned into products. Literally. Kim's shapewear line sells you the ideal of her shape-shifting image.
Kim is always trying something new, but being a mortician,
What would you want to go out in? Not like to the store, but go out, like
to the grave.
But Baudrillard would say they are not an aberration. They are the logical endpoints of postmodern culture, where media images surround and shape us. It's not just Frankenstein either. The Gothic has always been obsessed with bodies and their boundaries. Think of Dracula, blood exchange, penetration, bodies transformed against their will. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, one body containing two selves. Or Dorian Gray, the painted portrait aging while the body stays young, image and flesh divorced from each other. Gothic bodies are always threatening to transform or reveal themselves as other than they appear.
I can help you.
Okay, his name is Jean Baudrillard?
Jean?
Baudrillard? Baudrillard?
Jean Baudrillard?
Yes. This way?
Jean Baudrillard. This is this way.
Oh, on 8?
Yeah.
In 8? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jean Baudrillard. But he was, I don't know him exactly.
There's a surveillance capitalism aspect to all of this as well. Hauntings in Gothic stories, ghosts, monsters, past loves that won't stay dead, secrets that resurface, might remind us of something very current. Our constant sense of being watched by each other and by larger systems that we barely understand. In Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff can't let go of Catherine even after death. And Rebecca, the first Mrs. De Winter's presence, saturates every room despite being dead. In The Turn of the Screw, ghosts of dead servants corrupt the living children. Now think about our digital lives. Everything is recorded or archived or captured in some other datafied way. Photos from your past might still exist somewhere you forgot about. Your search history follows you around the internet in the form of targeted ads. Every message you've sent still exists on a server somewhere. Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism documents how tech companies extract data from our behavior. She explains it this way.
These companies unilaterally claiming our private human experience as their free source of raw material. So what do they do with that raw material? They lift out of it the rich predictive signals in our behavior, and they turn that into data. These behavioral data, you can think of it as a complex set of pipes, supply chains. So the behavioral data now is scraped from our experience, it goes into the supply chains, then it gets tipped onto the conveyor belts and right into the new factories. What happens in those factories? That's where we talk about things like artificial intelligence, machine intelligence. The new factories are computational.
This is full-on Gothic in multiple ways. First, we're being watched, but we don't exactly know how or when or by who, and how the data is being used. There's also something supernatural about it. We all joke about how our phones listen to us because ads pop up for the things we've recently spoken about. Or you look at a product once and it follows you across every website. It's like being haunted by a ghost that knows you too well. Arthur C. Clarke once wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." Surveillance capitalism is advanced enough to feel like dark magic. I think it's possible he's leading us astray though.
I don't know.
This is why I think of all the Gothic movies that might have come out in the past few years, Luc Besson's Dracula is one of the best, even though people are giving it flack for being too romantic or too similar to Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 masterpiece. First of all, yes, it's a lot like Coppola's film, but in my opinion, it's similar enough to be an honorable homage rather than a ripoff. Because Besson's depiction of Dracula is much like Coppola's, his depiction of Dracula as a monster was much more frightening than Eggers's mustachioed Count Olaf-like guy, which totally undermined the uncanny impact of the 1922 Nosferatu.
Thought you I would not.
Besson emphasizes the theme of how long, centuries, Dracula was willing to wait to reunite with his reincarnated love. That forces us, made cynical by the anguishes of swiping on dating apps and attention spans addled by algorithms, to face the one precondition for true romance, something we can barely do anymore: focus. People were also mad at Besson's humanization of Dracula, who is a monster. I think they were really mad about the moral quandary imposed on them of possibly liking a movie made by an alleged real-life predator. In truth, the monster's humanization only adds to the delightful, subtle uncanny that makes Gothic horror such a fine delicacy compared to traditional horror's more obvious thrills and gore. Dracula is a monster, but he's not all bad. It's a binary breaking gray area, which is another feature of postmodernism, I might add, that makes everything feel a little bit off. Plus, a more compassionate romantic view of Dracula actually dims the patriarchal heroism of the mortal men led by a priest in hot pursuit of the monster, mainly to protect the purity of their women, all because they feel that the women are their possessions and they're mad that Dracula is cucking them. That is one possible reading of the novel anyway, but I admit it's been years since I've read it. Finally, this is what worked so well about Besson's Dracula. It did not shy away from the Catholic element of everything. Literary theorist Victor Sage has written about how the Gothic has a complicated history with Catholicism. The original Gothic novels were written by Protestants horrified by Catholic corruption and excess. But at the same time, there's also a nostalgia found in the Gothic for a pre-Reformation world where supernatural evil meant that supernatural good was also real. Dracula engages seriously with Catholic ideas around damnation, redemption, eternity, and the soul. Spoiler alert, Dracula has to make the decision to give up his own existence in order for his reincarnated beloved to live a mortal life, saving her soul and possibly earning one back for himself. So, in a Baudrillardian world where nothing means anything beyond image and representation, the movie asks, what if souls are real? What if damnation is real? That's either refreshing or offensive depending on your perspective, but it's definitely doing something more interesting than Nosferatu's vague gestures towards dread. Full disclosure, Holly found this while I was recording the video essay. My hands are so cold, but she found it. She found him. It's really beautiful. It's like the coolest grave. Wow. Where's my hat? They got rid of my hat that I left as like an offering. Note, he died the year the Kardashians hit the scene. I'll do another selfie with him like I did once before. And that brings us to our final point. Gothic stories are known for weird, uneasy endings. There's very rarely clean closure. Without giving more spoilers, think about the endings of any of these recent Gothic stories, and you'll realize this is true. There's no sense of clean closure to our days. Every day, a new crisis bleeds into the next. We're living in persistent narrative uncertainty. So we retrieved the Gothic to make sense of it all. We need Dracula's focus in an age of infinite distraction. We need Frankenstein's body horror in an age of obsessive modification. We need Gothic weather in an age of climate anxiety. We need Gothic hauntings in an age of data surveillance. We need Gothic uncertainty in an age without closure. The Gothic is how we make the postmodern condition emotionally understandable. So maybe we don't need resolution. The point of art as a response to social conditions may be that it recognizes where we're at. And that's why there's no clean closure to this essay either, besides the statement that I hope that a wide range of visionary filmmakers continue to adapt these classic stories in a number of different ways. Thanks for watching Greetings from the Simulacrum. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Gothic movies are.